19th century London. We're in a cold, dark, sterile room. A white sheet is draped on a stone floor, and beneath it lies the lifeless body of a young boy, no older than 14. He has bloody, toothless gums, grey, dead eyes, a dark, black bruise on his forearm in the outline of a hand, as though seized by a powerful force. An inch-long wound on his small temple oozes with blood. His lips are bloated with a deep purple hue. Most remarkable of all, this corpse is fresh and unburied. All evidence points to him being a lively, healthy boy only 3 days prior. This boy is the final product of a brutal part in British history. A dark end to what was once a necessary and harmless crime. This is the tale of the London Burkers. Let's start at the beginning. 300 years ago, London was in a period of scientific enlightenment. The city is in wake of its most recent plague, and medical science is finally in a position to evolve. At the forefront of the advancement of surgical science were William and John Hunter, two brothers who were beginning to reshape the world of medicine.
By the 1750s and 60s, they are pretty much leading the charge. William was a particularly polished and a society lecturer. And John becomes particularly famous for his work as a dissector. Well, at the second half of the 18th century, the Hunter brothers are the most important figures in London.
The medical profession was absolutely burgeoning really quickly, right the way across Europe. And the problem was that they were only entitled to between 10 and 12 corpses legally a year. Every medical student needed 3 corpses during his training. 2 on which to take apart and really learn from the inside how the human body worked, so to learn anatomy, and the 3rd one on which to practice surgical techniques, so to learn what it feels like to cut into human flesh.
Officially they get 6 bodies a year by this point. Unofficially they sometimes had difficulty actually getting their hands on those bodies because they come from the gallows at Tyburn. Aspirant surgeons, people who are really ambitious, are not getting the access to anatomy that they want, and so they start to employ a middleman. They employ somebody who has privately already got convenient, quiet access to the dead, almost always a gravedigger, and this is the sort of the beginnings of professional resurrectionism. And of course it is much easier for them to give it over to somebody who's already got the connections to do it easily. So the first resurrectionists are almost always gravediggers.
Body snatchers, or resurrection men, were the people who supplied corpses for surgical science during the 18th and 19th centuries. Cheap, safe, and highly profitable.
Oh yeah, it was worth lots of money. I always give the annual yearly wage of a nurse as a kind of comparison sum. So that's a contemporary sum that somebody might expect to make in a year. It's about £20 to £25. So one good adult male body would fetch you £10. So that's just one body. So corpses are worth a lot of money.
So how did our boy end up on the table, bloody and murdered? Introduce John Bishop, a career resurrection man.
John Bishop, funnily enough, was born to better things. When his father died, he inherited a going concern, a small business, but a very thriving one. And what you find with body snatching is a lot of men start off in businesses that are to do with moving things around the city, legitimate things. And then they gradually seem to spot the higher money and the greater excitement of moving dead corpses around the city. By about 1818, he's given up. He's sold off his father's business, and he's a full-time resurrectionist. And it's estimated that he may have dug up or stolen as many as 1,000 corpses in his 13-year career. By the time of the Italian boy case, he's 33, and he's fallen into the trap that the majority of resurrection men fell into. He started drinking very heavily, and this is affecting his judgment, and it's making him much less discreet. You had to be absolutely discreet to do this revolting trade. It was a very secret world, and you had to keep very quiet. So he's getting a bit mouthy, he's getting a bit lazy, and in the summer of 1830, where he lives in Bethnal Green, his next door neighbour falls on really hard times and moves in with him. Now this is Thomas Williams, who's only 25, he's really quite young, and he's just got out of Millbank Penitentiary, where he'd been serving a very long sentence for theft.
In the Highlands, around the same time, a scandal came to light in Edinburgh, Scotland, that would change everything for Bishop and Williams. 2 Irish immigrants named Burke and Hare brutally murdered at least 16 people and sold their corpses to medical schools throughout the city for a handsome profit.
And it's actually Thomas Williams who makes the suggestion to John Bishop, look, if you're getting older, you're finding it harder to dig up bodies because obviously your strength is starting to fail. Why don't we actually do what Burke and Hare did 3 years earlier in Edinburgh and start murdering? It's a quick route. You know, there's lots of vagrants floating around London, vagrant children, vagrant women, old men. Why don't we lure them into this cottage of ours, promise them a bed for the night, and just kill them? And so actually, although John Bishop is a really nasty piece of work, he really is, it's actually the younger, inexperienced man who's never worked as a body snatcher, he's just a thief. He makes this suggestion to John Bishop, and they become the London Burkers.
Once Williams proposed the idea to Bishop that it was easier and more profitable to, well, skip a step in the body snatching process, it wasn't long until the duo descended into killing as a for-profit business. No longer are we faced with resurrectionists. Now London is faced with a pair of ruthless serial murderers.
So it wasn't that difficult to do the killing, particularly when there's 2 of you. They had to be very careful because obviously you're supplying bodies to anatomists who are the people most likely to spot this person hasn't been dragged up out of the grave, they've actually been murdered. Bishop and Williams adapted this mode of killing, and what they did was they'd make their victim insensible through drink that they drugged with laudanum, so they're completely sort of passed out in their house, and then they'd take them into their garden where there was a deep well, and holding them by the feet they'd thrust them headfirst down into the well and drown them. And they were quite right in guessing that the anatomists and surgeons of the day weren't sophisticated enough to spot that this was in fact a killing. Again, they were very, very careful not to leave any physical mark on the body, and when they went to sell their victims, they'd say, what they did was they'd smear soil and mud all over the body to make it look as though it had in fact been dragged up out of the grave.
Everything was going according to plan for Bishop and Williams, but it was the carelessness of a new member that marked the beginning of the end for the London Burkers.
James May, who was not actually involved in the murders but was part of their group, kind of like a porter for them really. He buys himself a cart, and he kind of becomes involved with increasingly kind of underworld elements and becomes involved in body snatching. It's what he was prominent for in the London Burking case. The case of the Italian boy was selling the teeth, and he definitely did that. Whether he was involved in the murder or not, he was there pretty quickly afterwards.
He goes back with them to the house to have a look at the corpse and to take out the teeth, because the teeth were a very, very lucrative sideline for body snatchers. These are the days obviously before sort of false dentures, so if you could, and this boy did have a very fine set of white teeth. So James May is allowed the sort of perk of taking out the teeth and selling them to a dentist, which he gets £5, which is a lot of money in those days. Well, on the morning of the 5th of November 1831, a body was delivered to King's College Anatomy Department in the Strand, and the dissecting room porter, he knew John Bishop very well and James May. He'd been receiving legitimately body-snatched bodies off them for years. So when they turn up with this young adolescent boy, he initially doesn't think anything of it. When they tip the body out of the large straw hamper onto the stone floor of the anatomy department, the dissecting room porter instantly spots this isn't right.
What essentially happened with the body of the Italian boy is that after they'd killed him, they pulled out the teeth pretty much immediately with a bradawl. James May knocked out the teeth. People at King's College, when they looked at the body, felt very suspicious about it because there was still fresh blood in the mouth from where they knocked the teeth out.
The forearm of the young boy has also got very deep finger mark bruises on it, which looks to him like there's been a struggle shortly before death. So while he delays Bishop, Williams and May on the pretext of going to get some change in order to pay them, he actually goes and gets the head of the anatomy department, who comes down, takes a quick look, thinks it looks suspicious, sends a messenger just over the Strand to the police, and they come en masse and they arrest the three men. John Bishop and Thomas Williams are executed on the 5th of December 1831 in front of a record crowd. Remember, executions were all in public in these days, so outside Newgate Prison in the Old Bailey, just thousands of people thronging and cheering and jeering, just to show you how hated those particular criminals were. Everybody's sort of, it's a yowling mob as the noose is put around their neck and they're executed.
Without the actions of the London Burkers, there would have been no boy on that stone floor in 1831. His murder marked what was largely the end of body snatching in the United Kingdom, as Parliament later passed the Anatomy Act in response to their heinous crimes. This act allowed surgeons to dissect the unclaimed bodies of the poor, and surgical research marched onward to where it is today.
My own view is that it was completely unforgivable. If ever you've been bereaved, you know the pain of having lost someone, and then the idea that their physical remains have been removed from what should be their legitimate eternal resting place and bartered around as an object for sale.
I'd say it was a good thing because of the progress in surgical science that came as a result of it. Obviously it upset an awful lot of people. At that time, because of the public sentiment about burial and what was supposed to happen to bodies after burial, and religious and superstitious feelings, it was not at that point possible for the surgeons to persuade people at large to do it any other way.
Although I've condemned the body snatchers and what they did wholeheartedly, and I mean it, I do also have to be aware, and the 3 times in my life when I've been for surgery, I'm sorry, I'm really, really glad that the person wielding the knife knows as much as they do. And I do have to ask myself, would they know as much as they do if it hadn't been for the body snatchers?
The tale of the London Burkers comes full circle after Bishop and Williams are ripped apart, piece by piece, in front of a jeering, vicious audience. Let's make one thing clear. The moment they became the London Burkers, Bishop and Williams were no longer body snatchers, they were killers. Killers who arose during an era in which selling bodies to medical science was commonplace. However, the question still remains to this day. Did the ends of body snatching justify its means?
I do often wonder, whenever I'm in a graveyard Particularly in a country graveyard, you're walking through it, it's all very picturesque and quiet. And I often wonder, beneath those headstones, how many of those graves are actually empty.